Okay, welcome back everybody to Environmental Science 101. Here in our final section, we have an evolution crash course. Okay, so before we get too far into this, there's a professor at Stanford, Robert Sapolsky. If you go through this and you don't like the content or it doesn't make sense to you, go on YouTube, search his videos, Human Behavioral Biology, Robert Sapolsky, Stanford. Find it, watch his stuff. They are phenomenal. It's the best way to learn this stuff if you have the time. Highly recommend. Okay, so what is life, right? And we get a little bit nature doc-ish here, right? So life is amazing. That includes you. These are orderly things, and no, you don't have to worry about memorizing this stuff. Please don't, although it'd be kind of impressive if you did. Okay. They reproduce, right? Make more of themselves. They exchange matter and energy with their environment constantly. We learn about this concept of static equilibrium sometimes, right? And closed systems, right, to matter and energy exchange. It's not always the best concept when it comes to talking about complicated things and talking about, human beings or anything that's alive, right? These things are open systems. They're constantly exchanging matter and energy with their environments, right? Back and forth. They grow and change over time, made of individual elements called cells, which are discrete. This is life as we know it, at least, right? So we've heard this before, or maybe we've heard parts of it. Maybe we're broadly familiar. We have a sense of what life is, and we can also get a sense of the state of life on the planet. So, long story short, life has been on the planet for a while, billions of years in one form or another. But what does it look like in the present day? And to be clear, it hasn't always looked like this. So, life as it exists right now is terribly abundant, right? So, show me that part of the world that doesn't have life in it. It's pretty rare, right? I mean, you look down at your table. I have my gross mouse here. I should probably clean. But it's got life all over it, right? Life is everywhere, either at one scale or another. It's covered. It's big, a lot of biomass, right? So we could, right, add up the total weight of all the living things in the world together, right? All their combined mass would be something like 550 billion tons. Ton is 2,000 pounds of carbon stuff, right? And this is mostly going to be stored in forests. That's where most of it comes from, but to a lesser extent in these shallow water ecosystems, reefs, wetlands, estuaries. If you don't quite remember what those are, that's okay. Don't worry about it for now. Shallow water places, right? And I included this just because I thought it gave a really great visual for comparison here. So here we have human beings, right? The total estimate biomass of all the people in the entire world put together is about 60, and M is mega. It means millions of tons, right? So 60 million tons of human beings all put together. By comparison, there's, roughly twice as much livestock, right? A lot more livestock weight, and a whole lot less of wild vertebrates, right? Land animals, as we would typically know them, right? But ants outweigh people. It was a fun fact when I was a kid, and it's still true now, right? A ton of the biomass here is insects, and we will see when we look at species, richness, and diversity that most species, statistically speaking, are insects. Like, on average, life is an insect. There's a lot of those, right? Termites, ants, and then all other arthropods, which is our term that includes insects here and some other stuff in the sea as well, right? It is complex, right? So we kind of have our A, B, C, D here is how it's set up, right? So abundant, A, B, right? Complex, C. We could spend a long time here, but part of what makes it complicated and part of what makes other things complicated is you have these interrelationships between the parts. Each individual cell is communicating in one form or another, not communicating in the sense of talking, but chemically or physically communicating with all of these other cells, and all of the cells combine to form these organs, which have an interrelationship with the other organs, which come together to form the organism, which has a relationship with the other organisms who form these groups, who have relationships with other groups, right? You have these complicated interactions between parts. It is adaptive, right? What are the things that life does? It changes over time constantly. It is never sitting still. It is never just one thing. And all the parts and relationships are also changing constantly. So complicated to begin with, and then also changing. We have this failure to predict what is going to happen, right? So I ask this poll question, right, is something like, no matter how complicated something may be, sooner or later human beings will figure it out. And I find that the vast majority of my students tend to agree with that statement. I would be on the disagree side, and there's a lot of reasons why I would be on the disagree side and why I'm really confident in that position, but this is one of those reasons, right? And we don't have to get too, head in the clouds with it. This thing's called emergent behavior. So we have these individual parts. You can think about individual ants, right? So, you are an ant scientist and you study an individual ant in a laboratory for a long time. And then you go to make predictions about how 10,000 ants are going to interact together based on studying that one ant. Are you going to have any idea? No, absolutely not. Never. You would never be able to predict the behavior of the entire colony from just studying a single ant. It is impossible. That is what this is referring to. And failures of prediction to give you the particulars of anything complicated is just a rule of the world. And we'll talk about why and see some examples in a later section. So here we get to D, right? So we had abundant, A, B, C, complex, and then diverse, right, for the state of modern life. I included this just because I thought it was visually striking and had a good image, right, for the variety of life. So we got flowering plants, fungi, looks like this could be some sort of fern or lycophyte, maybe too much structure for that, don't quote me on it. Parakeet, fish, terrestrial vertebrates, bugs, trees, right? It's a lot of different kinds. So I also put this down here, and we don't need to spend too much time on this, but just breaking down organisms, right? So in total, and this is just what is known, right? This is not estimates of what is not known. We got about 2 million species that have been discovered or cataloged or identified by scientists. Number varies a bit depending on who you ask and what year, right? Animals, plants, fungi, protists, which are these single-celled but still complex things, and then eubacteria. So bacterial organisms there. Of the known species of animals, right? So we got about a little over 1 million animal species. A lot of vertebrates, vertebrates. Oh, it's confusing. There's the vertebrates. Oh, yeah. And then, right, so the vast majority of it is going to be invertebrates here. So this is insects. Yeah, so all the vertebrates put together is about 60,000 out of 1.3 million. In other words, it's a tiny fraction. Yeah, it corresponds to like these blue and green stuff over here. Vast majority is insects and other invertebrates. Of the plants, right, we've got about 300,000 identified. Vast majority of them are going to be flowering plants of one kind or another. We don't need to worry about monocots and dicots, right? So we got flowering plants like this thing, tend to produce flowers and fruit, both things we call angiosperms. We got some mosses, nice and simple. We know what those are. Ferns, also nice and simple. And then conifers, just a few of them, right? Things with pine cones that we're familiar with. Okay, so abundant, complex, diverse is the state of life as it exists on this planet currently. Got a feel for it. Okay. For the other part of this, right, we're going to go over 4 concepts that we need to understand evolution, and then we're going to get it. All right. And that's us going up the stairs. That's you. So first, right, is you're going to know what heredity is. So organisms inherit traits and genetic material from the parents. We're going to know what genetic variation is, that individuals have different traits as a result of differences in genes and genetic material. Really, we don't have to worry about the genetic part. We just have to know that, every individual is different, is unique. You know what natural selection is, right? So those with the best traits pass those traits on and reproduce. Why? Because they're able to do the best in their environment, whatever it might be. And finally, we understand evolution by natural selection, the full name of it, as a result of 1, 2, and 3. Heredity, genetic variation, and natural selection all combine to evolution. Okay, so we can go one by one. So genetic variation, yeah. So these are Darwin's famous finches from his time in the Galapagos Islands. Drawing, right? So each one of them is a bit different in terms of its traits. They inherit traits from their parents, just like human beings would. Little mistakes, I say mistakes, sometimes they're beneficial, usually they're not, called mutations. It is a mistake in the sense of being a copying error or some other sort of error in the copying of DNA. These tend to be bad or harmless, some are beneficial. Okay, bottom line, every individual is different, has different traits, inherits its traits from its parents. I use this word beneficial, right? But what precisely does that mean? We can think about beneficial in the sense of, okay, this organism is big and strong and this one is not, but sometimes there are situations where that wouldn't necessarily be a good thing, right? So beneficial is really a relative term. They're beneficial relative to their environment. So this leads directly into our next idea here of natural selection, right? Something is beneficial if it promotes reproduction. And the forces, right, of nature that come together to choose, right, who's reproducing, not choose in a literal sense, but figuratively, right, choose who is going to live and who is going to not, that is called natural selection. So the individuals who reproduce pass on their genetic material. The ones who don't are erased, right? So we have just the survivors and the reproducers over time. Reproduce, the individual must survive, grow, and mate, get food, and thrive in its environment. To be able to do that, pull resources out that it needs. So a beneficial mutation or trait or gene is beneficial towards making more of itself in a given environment, right? So we have a sort of classic example here, right? So we have a predator bird, which is swooping down and eating these mice, and some of the mice are black, some of them are white. Over time, what is going to happen? Well, as a result of this force on the population, it's going to swoop down and see the light-colored ones right away, and so over time, this population of mice is going to adapt. It's going to shift towards having more black mice and fewer of these light-colored ones. So it results in the end in organisms who are adapted to their environments. Okay, so let's get here. And I've included some stuff here to kind of rule out common misconceptions, right? So we wind up as a result of all these forces with evolution by natural selection as a combined effect. It's still happening constantly at every level, sometimes faster, sometimes slower as things adapt to us. It happens from generation to generation. And so just an example we can think about here is with languages, right? So you could probably understand like 99% of what your great-grandmother is saying, right, if you were to talk to them, assuming that you sort of spoke the same language in the first place, right? So if my great-grandmother speaks English, I can talk to her, and she can probably talk to her great-grandmother, who also speaks English, and they would be able to understand each other. But would I be able to talk to my great-grandmother's great-grandmother and us understand each other? No. And it's simply because there's been so much time that has passed, right? The language has evolved to where we are no longer able to understand each other. It's something important to keep in mind, right, is that these changes are happening from generation to generation. New species do not simply emerge as they are. I've included these three just to give some examples of what evolution is not, right? So it's not what you see in Pokemon, because that's just a single individual changing over time. It's not what you learned about with the frogs and the tadpoles here. That is, right, maturation. That's ontogeny, right? And it's not human beings coming from chimps. So the idea is not that modern human beings come from modern apes. The idea, which we should be able to understand here, is that modern humans and modern apes both branched off of some sort of common ancestor population. That is the idea. Okay, so I just want to review the big questions here, right? So after all of this, what specifically are the questions that I would expect you to be able to answer to where you're really getting it? All right, short. What is the environment? What is environmental science, and why is it important? What are the foundational needs of human beings, right? There were those 7 we talked about. And how have the ways that we meet those needs changed over time? And that's giving some examples from the historical context, whatever stood out to you. What is genetic variation, and why is it important? What is natural selection? Could you give an example, be able to identify it, or what it is not? What does it mean to adapt or to be adaptive. Adapting is beneficial. Things that are adaptive are beneficial traits in the context of an environment, lead to survival and reproduction. And finally, what is or is not evolution. So this does complete Unit 2, our first set of videos. Thanks so much.